The Strategic Hotbox with Dr. Brandi Love Stankovic. Discussing leadership, business, and how to take control of your life and achieve greatness. From the streets of Las Vegas, energized, informed, and never diluted. It's time to kick some ass.
Welcome back to the Strategic Hotbox. It's your girl, Dr. Brandi Stankovic, and I am so excited to be here. And I know I say this a lot on the Hotbox, but I have one of my favorite guests ever here. I might actually be more starstruck by you, Mr. Dean Hallett, than I have been on anybody that we've had here. And we're going to get to know him and his background and his journey here in just a second in our episode called Hire Your Weakness. Let's get started. In regards to hiring your weakness, we've talked about and we've dabbled in this topic before. And you know that I believe in learning and ongoing learning, continual learning. And obviously, one of the big pieces of the Strategic Hotbox is to learn in addition to loving and kicking ass. And when we learn, we want to continue to progress as individuals. But we can't necessarily always be the best at everything. And that pressure that a lot of high-performing leaders out there put on themselves is not realistic. And it'll actually make us less good at some of the things that we should be focusing our energy and efforts and talent on. And so I want to kind of dive into that for a second. And we're going to bring in Dean here to share his experiences. When it comes to hiring your weakness, when I was working on the Strategic MVP book, some of you may be familiar with that. I worked with Mark C. Thompson, and we had the opportunity to work with all these different leaders and to talk to all these different CEOs. And Sarah Blakely was a part of that. And she is known as saying the smartest thing that she ever did was hire her weakness. And she, of course, CEO of Spanx and has a tremendous career and really has capitalized on having really great people around her. One thing I do want to throw out there, though, as we begin this discussion and maybe become a bit of a devil's advocate, is when we talk hire your weakness, you don't necessarily, that doesn't mean that you can just be lazy, and it is not an excuse. So I'm not good at this, and so I'm going to get this person on my team to do that, and so I don't ever have to do that again. And that's not what that means. And I may have even thrown out this example, but it drives me insane when people say stuff like, I'm not a math person. Or I'm not in marketing, so, I don't need to be, do that. And since when has you highlighting that you're not a math person make your ineptitude just celebrated and okay? That's just madness. If you aren't good at math, either one, learn it, or two, get people around you that are and that can help fulfill that strength. But we need to build it together. Another component of this, and I know we've chatted about it in the podcast, but it's worth kind of re-exploring here as we dive into this topic, is the notion of bumper to bumper. I have this piece on bumper to bumper. I believe in this concept. My husband, as you may know, is a mechanic at BMW, and BMW mechanics are bumper to bumper. So some of you have heard this concept or story from me before. But the mechanics being bumper to bumper, they aren't specialty mechanics. So the mechanics at Ford and other dealerships and brands are specialty mechanics. So if you take your car in and the transmission is sticking and the window won't roll down, it'll pull in to, at Ford, it'll pull into a transmission specialist, pull back out, pull into another bay, and the window will get fixed by two different mechanics because they're very specialized and focused. At BMW, if you came in with the same issues, then you would go to one mechanic who had fixed both the transmission and the windows. And so they understand more of what's happening in the vehicle. Now, will my husband or any mechanic at BMW ever be as specialized or as sharp on top of their game as a specialty mechanic at another brand? Well, no, right? But one thing that he does understand is the entire car. And that is so important and something that we can't lose sight of. That strategic understanding is important. You can't lose sight of that in moments of hiring your weakness or getting people around you that are experts. And this can be applied in the leadership front all the way down to or any aspect of your life. Even think about those moms and dads out there that can't do it all and can't be the perfect mom. And it's okay not to be the perfect mom at everything. But if you know what that understanding is, that big picture understanding of where you want your kids to be and how you want them to achieve, then you can get people on board on your team to help you do that. An example is that I knew very quickly after having a child that I was not intended created on this planet to be a stay-at-home mom. I have much better patience and love and giving to my kids when I'm not around them all day. Is that terrible to say? It's just the truth. And so one thing that we learned was we also didn't want them in daycare all the time. And so we found nannies and different people to be grandparents and different people to be part of our kids' lives that can be in their lives while after school, while we're at work. And then I can be the best mom that I can be when I get home, and understanding that that's my weakness, and I can give better in my strengths if I have somebody that supports me in that effort. It also has come and been very relevant to me as we end the year here. I revisited my New Year's resolutions, my goals at the beginning of the year. And what goals have I accomplished? What have I not? Where do I need to kick some butt here in the last couple months? And I had a few things on there about taking lessons in different sports. Like I used to play softball, so shout out to all my softball homies from the years. But one thing I had is, I miss softball and I want to be great at softball. And then I also had like tennis lessons on there, and I had golf lessons, and I was just really bright-eyed at the beginning of the year, I think is what it was. And these things haven't necessarily happened. And I had this moment of aha recently of saying, I shouldn't have to or feel the pressure of having to be the best in all of those areas. Softball isn't a part of my life anymore. It was in the past. Would I do it once in a while? Sure. But I don't need to progress in that area anymore. And I should be okay with allowing that skill to soften. Golf, however, is in my life all of the time, and I'm from a business standpoint golfing many times a year. So if I was going to take lessons somewhere, that might be the place to focus my energy because it serves me in the vision that I have today, not just of these bright-eyed things that I was doing in the past. So part of hiring your weakness and part of knowing your strengths is being able to let things go too, and recognizing that they won't necessarily be strengths. So let's nurture those parts of us that can be the best and get people around us that can support the other side. So our guest today is Dean Hallett. And I'd like to formally introduce you now. You're an organizational advisor, leadership facilitator, executive coach. So working with different organizations from across the country. You've got a bachelor's from USC, so a Trojan is in the house. And you're also a former senior EVP and CEO of 20th Century Fox and Walt Disney Studios. Mm-hmm. Wow. This, like I said, am I blushing?
Sounds really cool.
It does. I might be blushing a little. And so I have a really important question to start us off. Sure. And this isn't even, are the X-Men going to join the Avengers now that Fox and Walt Disney?
No, they haven't let that secret out yet. I don't know.
Oh, that could be exciting.
That's in Disney's hands. I was on the Fox side.
Oh, were you? Okay, I see. Yeah. It's an important part of superheroes in my kids' lives. And I
wouldn't be surprised if you see them come together.
Ooh, I like that. And if they do, you heard it here first. Just gonna throw that out there. So tell us a little bit about your journey in leadership.
My journey in leadership actually started really young. I was in college, and I had an opportunity through some friends of mine to get exposed to a personal growth company back in the, late 70s. Mm-hmm. There were two primary companies. There was LifeSpring and Est. Mm. And I went to the workshops at LifeSpring. I did a 5-day intensive basic training and a 5-day more intensive advanced training. And it allowed me to get in touch with more of who I am, what values I have, what strengths I have, and to run with those, mm-hmm. and to be open to experiencing new things about myself and growing and changing and not being so fearful of what other people thought about me along the way. Sure. And so as I went into my career, I had opportunities to take responsibility for my own leadership. Mm. And that's a big thing because I actually just had a conversation with somebody yesterday. How pervasive it is that companies don't spend the time to develop their people. Absolutely. There's a feeling, I think, that people will get it through osmosis. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's really the foundation for the Peter Principle, where mm-hmm. people get into jobs that they can't do. I don't think it's so much that they don't have the abilities. I think they just haven't been nurtured. Mm-hmm. They haven't been coached and developed. Mm-hmm. So when I had opportunities, the first one, there's a couple at Fox that I would mention. The first one was when all of the theaters used to exhibit movies on film, and then they switched to digital. And when that first happened, there was a lot of chaos in the industry. All the theaters had to convert their equipment, and there were way too many people at the table. Even within Fox, there were way too many people at the table. And the domestic and international units were separate. So mm-hmm. There was no cohesion. So I went to my boss, the CFO. I didn't mm-hmm. have any title beyond that at that point. And mm-hmm. I said, this is an area where I think I could help bring people together. And they had been holding meetings with 30 or 35 people in the room.
Right.
And I decided, I don't know anything about digital cinema. I need to put together the primary players in each of the areas. So I got the head of engineering, the head of distribution, the head of marketing, the head of finance, all the different people, brought them in a room, and I pulled a Quincy Jones. I literally said, leave your egos at the door. We're going in this room. We're going to come up with a strategy for digital cinema, and we're not leaving the room until we're done.
Wow.
We were in there for about 3.5 or 4 hours. We came up with the key components of our strategy, and we never deviated after that.
Wow.
So, again, I didn't know anything. I had to rely on the people that were in the room. I was just a coach, and I had to make sure that I created an environment where people could develop enough trust with each other to communicate.
Love that.
Yeah.
So you also were an advocate for yourself, in a sense.
I was.
Because you went to the table saying, I want to do this.
Yeah, I think at Fox, you sort of have to be an advocate for yourself. It's a very entrepreneurial environment.
Is it?
So if you're willing to take the reins on something, you can do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that you said that I absolutely love is making sure that people create, or organizations create, an environment that makes it safe to do that.
Right.
Because one of the things that I see, and I agree with you, a lot of organizations stop doing learning and development, especially as the person gets to be a senior leader. Right? Frontline staff, like, they need training.
Sure.
But then executive chief C-suite staff don't necessarily get their own personal growth development plans other than performance management, and don't necessarily have a safe environment to screw up, to nurture, to create accountability or advocate for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge sometimes, because then they're expected to know it all, and sometimes they operate from that place.
Right.
Yeah. I have one more example.
Please do.
Peter Chernin, who was in charge of all of Fox at one point, came to me one day, and they were doing video on demand deals where they were going to distribute digitally for the first time to these platforms around the world. And he said, I hope that you've got our content digitized and ready to go so that we can actually fulfill our obligations on those deals. And I say, hey, that's a really good idea. Right. I don't know why you're telling the CFO,
right.
But there wasn't a lot of central infrastructure. We had all these different verticals. All the different theatrical, home entertainment, TV distribution groups were separate. So I, once again, pulled in the people from all the different respective areas. And this time it was a little different because a lot of people had vested interests. The people in television distribution had primarily been the ones servicing platforms around the world in the tape world. And so when we went digital, they wanted to have control of it.
Right.
So I brought in people from home entertainment, brought in people from theatrical, from TV distribution, and we went through the same process like we did in digital cinema. But ultimately, I had to make sure everybody felt that they were heard. Everybody had an opportunity to present their idea about it. And what united us was we decided to start at the very top and really look at what are the key guiding principles that we want to have as we move forward on this. Do we want to be internal? Do we want to go external? And ultimately, we came up with a mantra was make it once and use it as many times as possible around the world, so we weren't constantly recreating files.
I love that.
And there I did take about 3 years to get that up and running because I had that TV distribution group, because they had controlled it, because they had access to it. Two things. One, they wanted it. And two, they didn't trust anybody else to do as good of a job as they had been doing with it. And that took a lot of hand-holding. And when you're really trying to affect change like that, it's great to have a stated mandate from the top. I didn't. I had support. They said, we got your back. But they were not out there advocating on my behalf that this is what we were going to do. So it was like pushing a boulder uphill. Right. But we still got there. And it taught me a lot about really what allows people to get, to feel like they've been heard, to feel like they're a member of the team, even if they don't get their way. But to be a part of the process, they take a lot more ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you get that gumption inside of you? Was it all back from college or just throughout the years?
I don't know. I honestly, I think it was just an evolution in terms of realizing that I needed to tap into how I learned to get, I don't know. I've always been sort of a mediator where I get, one person on one side of the ledger and one person on the other side and somehow get them to communicate in an effective way. And I've grown that over time. And it was just an instinct that I had to pull everybody else in because like I said, I didn't know anything. We built a system internally to service the entire world on thousands and thousands of movies and episodes. We had to go and convert the entire library. I knew nothing about that. Right. So I had to rely on them, but I just, I work with people. I think I'm pretty balanced over the time as I've grown. So person A may not be able to communicate with person B, but I'm in the middle, and I'm close enough to each of them that I can get them involved and help get them to communicate with each other in the same room.
And having that buy-in is really important, especially going into the wild frontier in the fact of not everyone had been doing digital for 30 years and everybody's an expert and are comfortable with it. When things are unknown, it's even more uncomfortable and people want control. That creates that security for them.
Absolutely.
So having that buy-in is so important.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So are leaders able then to do it all, to be kind of a jack of all trades?
I think they can have the ability to do each of the things. There are some people that are very diverse in their talents, but in today's world where we're constantly facing disruption, I don't think anybody has the bandwidth. I know that I've been saying for probably the last 5 years, every year change is happening faster, and I think it's going to continue. And one person cannot possibly, in my eyes, be able to see all the things that are coming in and disrupting them, and they have to be able to have a team around them that they can rely on. And it's not just hiring them, it's developing them, it's trusting them, it's giving them ropes so they feel empowered.
Sure.
I had an opportunity to meet General Stanley McChrystal. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's the general that was given the oversight of all the special forces of the military. And when we were going, and Al-Qaeda was beating us at everything in terms of the number of raids that were happening and so forth, and they wanted to flip it around the other way.
Sure.
And he decided to do a a conference call of some sort, video and audio. He started with 100 people. He ultimately got to 1,500 people where he would tell everybody everything that he knew. And then they would raise questions about how to approach certain things, and he would talk about how he would address it. I think about it this way, and maybe I do that, but he would be careful not to tell them what to do.
Sure.
So they would ultimately develop the skill to think, how would the general think about this, and make their decisions on the ground? Because that's the only way they were going to make the decisions fast enough to get ahead of Al-Qaeda, because General McChrystal didn't have the bandwidth to hear everything out.
Right.
They went from doing about 1 or 2 raids a month to doing about 30 raids a month, and completely flipped the tables.
Wow.
And I always laugh at the entertainment industry because they're so afraid to put a piece of marketing material out that somebody will do something with it, or they can't see it too early. And here our national security is at stake, and he's sharing it with 1,500 people around the world. And I know they took an oath.
Right.
I solemnly swear to defend the Constitution and all that.
Right.
But it just seems absurd to me sometimes how protective we can be with what we have.
In industries where it doesn't, I absolutely agree with you. And the regulatory environment can scare people enough to want to be that way.
Sure.
That, I think that sharing of information and making sure that you force teammates to do that. What came to mind is I've had people that work with me, for me, that it make it really easy for me to make the decision. Meaning they'll say, well, it's up to you what you want to do. I'm like, because I'm such a go-go that it's easy for me to go, okay, then do this. And turning it back and saying, no, I want you to tell me strategically what you think is the right decision, and then I'll support you in that effort or give feedback on what else we could be doing or that type of thing. But it's sometimes a growth opportunity of the executive and the leader to also make sure they're not filling the gaps of the people around them.
Sure. Yeah, to get them ready to be able to make the decisions, and to the people that are working for you, and just be there. Know that you've got their back, and you're a sounding board anytime they need it. I've watched people grow tremendously, and that's so rewarding to me, is to build a team and then set up that kind of a culture, and then watch them realize what they're capable of that they hadn't been doing before.
I love that. So can hiring your weakness work, and how does it help the success of the organization?
I think it absolutely works. I think it's imperative. It'll help the organization. Right now, it depends what industry, but so many industries have such diversity of consumers that they have to be able to look at things through so many different lenses. So sometimes it's not even, we call it weakness, but it may not be a weakness. It's just, I don't have an exposure to this particular area, this particular consumer.
Sure.
And if you're looking at everybody that you're trying to serve, the more lenses that you look through, the more comprehensive of an approach you can have. I think it's imperative that people hire those people, develop those people, and put them in a position where they can have that visibility so that they can contribute.
I love that. The more eyes you look through, the more comprehensive of an approach. That is just so powerful. And you're right that sometimes it's kind of those blind spots that we might have, unintentional, not even aware that they're there, but having a diverse team allows for all kind of a grander perspective.
Yeah. In some of the leadership workshops that I do, we do these experiential exercises, and it gives people a quick look at, a very obvious look at how we're trained in school to do our own work, not cheat, not look at anybody else's paper, and our automatic reaction so often is to do things on our own. And we do an exercise where they come up with results and they're not allowed to talk and so forth. And then we open it up to working as a team, and we end up with this motto, which it's not ours, I hear it all the time: we are better together than we are alone. Always. I won't even say 9 times out of 10. Always the solution is better of the group than it was for the individuals. And I just see that in practice all the time in all the different types of projects that we do. So I think it's tremendous. It's a win for the corporation. It's a win for the company, as long as the boss has to realize that they shouldn't be threatened. If I'm a good coach and I develop my people, I've demonstrated my value. It doesn't matter if they're better in this area than me.
Right. And that's not a threat necessarily. It's a support. It's a synergy. Yeah, a blessing. Absolutely. Yeah. And so how can you recognize, though, those people that support versus, that are being a team player, that have, the end vision in mind?
It's tricky. It's tricky. Sometimes you get people that will look you in the eye and tell you that they're completely supportive of everything you're doing. I think there's a couple different ways. One is listen to the undercurrents that are out there. I have a trusted inner circle wherever I am, and I get to hear things, and I can get a sense of whether people are supportive of me or not. I can look at their actions versus their words. If you listen, you can tell. And I also think it's important in an organization to not just interact with your direct reports. I think it's really important to stay connected 1 or 2 layers below that and find out what's on their mind and what's happening, because you may hear something that may be symptomatic of an area that's not supportive of and in alignment with the vision. And it's important to know those things. And I think as a leader, it's your job to find those things out.
Absolutely. And that's so good. So ear to the ground, in a sense, and actually getting out into the organization.
Absolutely.
And not just being with your direct reports. That can be really powerful, because information is filtered up always.
Right.
And so being down in it, you can get an idea. Just going into it with a thing of not trying to shake things up too much, but more of the listening role of what I mean by that is I've seen CEOs come out of their office and go to the front line, and then suddenly start making decisions without the buy-in of everybody that was in between. And it's more just putting an ear to ground and saying, how can we all work together to create better?
And it's better if it comes from the top and you have somebody who is constantly talking about the kind of culture that you want to have, an open, collaborative culture, where you get all the best ideas on the table. Ultimately, the leaders have to make the decisions.
Right.
But you want the ideas to flow, and people need to realize that type of behavior is going to be rewarded. And if you can do that, then you can shift the whole culture. It's much harder if you're doing it in your department. You can do it, and I would encourage people to do it, but it's so much better if it's coming from the top, because then all the other departments are doing it too.
Right. So it's like an undercover boss thing in a sense, right? So would you do that back in the day? Just show up and be in the front and in a disguise?
Not in a disguise, no. I'd show up all the time now.
And just be there.
Yeah, it's worked for me to really be encouraging for people to bring their ideas forward. I started an accelerated leadership program at Fox about 2 years in, when I realized they didn't have a development budget for the individuals. Training budget had been cut to zero right after 9/11. So I said, we have a lot of really smart people here, but they're working in silos. They haven't been taught leadership skills. Like I said, learn it through osmosis maybe. And we started doing these exercises to bring people together, and it had an impact. People were suddenly having conversations with other people in the hallway about topics that they otherwise would just be doing on their own. And it created a better synergy. It created more teamwork, more trust. I would say it didn't go as far as I wanted it to, but there was definitely a shift in the right direction, and that made it easier.
Progression.
For everybody.
Yeah. Can you share a funny story or something crazy that's happened?
I can share a couple of them. Let me start with one where sometimes people in leadership positions, their behavior is amazing, positive and negative. I worked for the chairman when I was at the Walt Disney Company. I worked for the chairman of the studio, and finance. I was a CFO. Finance was working on a project and had done something that rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe they questioned this event he was putting on, or what the budget was, whatever it was. And I heard through the grapevine that he was upset and that he said we had gone too far. And I reached out to him and I didn't hear anything back. 2 to 3 weeks, he would not talk to me. And I said, you know what? I need to be the bigger person here. He's pissed.
Right.
I better do something.
Sure.
So I called him. I actually sent him an email. And I said, you've known me well enough to know that I have the company's best interest in mind. You've known me long enough to give me the benefit of the doubt. I'm about to leave on vacation, and I'd hate to leave with you and I not talking to each other. Literally after I hit send on the email, 30 seconds later, my phone rings. It's him. I pick it up, and he goes, Dean, buddy, how you doing? I just had to kiss the ring. I had to humble myself before him and let him know that I'm a team player and
we're on the same
let's move
page
past
here.
this.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I don't agree with everybody else's leadership style, but I find ways to work with it and find ways to communicate and keep walls from building up. I won't let them build up too long.
Yeah, and cut through any elephants or things that are out there and not going on vacation without that follow-up.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't want that hanging over my head. One more story. I won't give the name of the movie star.
Okay.
And when I tell the story, you'll probably understand why. I was in a marketing meeting once, and the chairman was in there, and any time in that room that phone rang, we knew the call was for the chairman. So he picks up the phone, and he says, hello? And we know it's his assistant. And he goes, no, you can't do that. And you could tell that the assistant must have hung up. He slams the phone down, and he goes on this rant about this star and how he's creating nothing but havoc on the movie set, and it's terrible. As he's in the middle of the rant, that star opens the door and walks in the room. And again, I won't say his name, but he goes, how are you? Gives him a big hug because he has to manage the talent relation. So maybe that wasn't super authentic, but it's what he had to do reality. In the moment. And he diffused everything because I know that this star was coming in to say what he wanted to have happen on the set. But he said, these are the people that are marketing your film. They're doing a great job. And he knew that this star couldn't make an issue out of it in that moment.
Right.
After he left, he told us the story, which was this star was coming to work every day, wanted to change the lines in the script, was killing 2 or 3 hours a day, having discussions while cast and crew are all standing, getting paid.
On the job,
and it's
on the
very
clock,
expensive. Yeah. And he said to this person, we can shut this production down right now. It's about a $125 million film. He said, we can shut this production down right now and we will lose $50 million. You, however, will never work another day in Hollywood. So get on the set, say your lines, do your job. At the end of the day, you want to have some conversations about the script, we're happy to hear it, but not when people are standing around.
Good for him.
And so I admired the chairman for doing that because a lot of chairmen won't do that. And they run way over budget on films and say there's nothing we can do, it's the talent.
Right. But
we were very cost conscious.
That's great. And I love that they're keeping the big picture in mind, right? Back to where we started some of this, and not allowing somebody who is that subject matter expert. In that case, the star is the talent, right. Is the subject matter expert. We can't function necessarily without them in that moment, but not letting it completely control the bigger strategic, initiative. And that's keeping the costs and getting the film out and getting everybody paid. Wow, how fun! So there's divas in the industry. You're saying that?
There's a few. I made it a point to stay way behind the camera.
Sure.
But I had some interesting things. I walked out of my office once, and Sean Connery was standing right there.
Wow!
I had the opportunity to stand there and talk to him for 10 minutes.
How cool!
Just completely spontaneous.
That's
great.
Neat. That's really neat. Can you share a bold action item for our listeners?
Yeah, I think what's really important. We're talking about for somebody to develop them, for somebody to hire their weakness, they have to be self-aware. I don't know if you've heard of the Johari Window. Johari Window, for the listeners, basically it's what other people see or don't see in you and what you see or don't see in you. And we have blind spots that other people see, and feedback is an incredible tool. And if you're uncomfortable with feedback, some people aren't comfortable with giving feedback to their boss, you may not be comfortable asking for it, start one-on-one. I actually would run exercises where I would bring in all my direct reports and I would give them structured questions that were geared to giving and receiving feedback. And if I know my blind spots, I can do something about them. And I might even learn that maybe this isn't how I am, but it's how I'm being perceived, and I have an opportunity to change it.
Yep.
So if you want to grow and develop, it helps to know what it is that you have to work on. And
Absolutely.
if you ask for feedback, you can get that. So I would do some exercise like that.
Great. And how, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Easiest way is Dean Hallett at deanhallett.com. That's my email address.
Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. It's great. Thanks for having me.
Let's head out to the shout out.
This is Megan Jameson in Fort Worth, Texas, in my exclusive Hotbox swag. You're listening to Dr. Brandi on the Strategic Hotbox.
Thank you to Megan. Thank you to Dean for being here. And the conversation was flowing so good that I'm going to just throw some kick-ass out to you really quick. So for those listeners out there, buckle in, hold on. Here we go. Our first is that always maintain that strategic understanding. Big picture, know what the goal is. Number 2 is perform an honest introspection, assess, Johari Window, just understand what is happening inside with you. Number 3 is practice humility in that process. Know that you have opportunities to grow in addition to the people that are around you. Number 4, always hire the person, not necessarily the role, because we need to understand that big picture and that synergy that Dean described for us today. And number 5 is don't forget to grow together. The team is always stronger as all of us continue to grow forward together. That's your top 5 kick-ass. So thank you to our Hotbox listeners. Thank you to Dean for being here today. Thank you for Megan of showing off her swag. Until we see you again, get out there and kick some ass.
Thanks, everybody.